Continued warm temperatures with possible afternoon cloudiness and light afternoon winds. An expected high today of 96, low tonight at 64, high tomorrow 98. Currently in Farmington, New Mexico, 90 degrees.
"300 years ago, a wandering band of Navajo hunters came to this place. It was deserted and in ruins, just as it is today. The Navajos had no idea who the builders were, so they simply called them Anasazi, which in Navajo means the ancient ones. These walls are ancient indeed. They were built almost 1,000 years ago. The Anasazi lived here for 150 years. And then, for reasons we can only guess at, they disappeared, and their buildings fell into decay. They had no writing, they left no records for us to decipher. If we want to find out about them, we must study the surviving material remains of their everyday life. Archaeologists have learned much this way, but many problems remain to be solved before we can fully understand the rise and fall of these prehistoric Indian people. Who were the Anasazi? We know they were descended from an earlier people whom archaeologists call the basket makers. They lived in the same area, the Four Corners area where New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado meet at a single point.
We can clean that up when we come in off the floor.
Right here. Somebody ruined
it.
The basket makers lived in pit houses. These semi-underground dwellings have been found and excavated all over this region. Their inhabitants supported themselves by hunting game and gathering wild seeds, nuts, roots, and berries. This particular pit house site is in New Mexico's Chaco Canyon National Park. When Fro Rainey visited the excavation, his guide was Al Hayes, an archaeologist for the National Park Service.
Al, how long have you been kicking around this part of the world?
Well, I came down the old Chili line into Santa Fe from Alamosa just 40 years ago next month. Thought it was the damnedest country I'd ever seen, and 3 weeks later I was hooked and I have never left.
And ever since then you've been trying to figure out what happened to these people, I can imagine.
No, the first few years I thought I knew, but I've been more and more trying to figure out. A long time ago, about 37, a bunch of us were camped over here near Chetrokittle one winter evening with a moonlight on the ruin, and I thought, my God, they'd done it all. We were born 25 years too late. Now I'm afraid I won't live long enough to even know what the questions are to ask.
Well, since you have everything here, from the earliest part, the early basket maker, right on through?
Well, we probably got 8,000 or 9,000 years, anyhow, of history here.
Straighten me out on this one, will you, Al? I'm a little confused as to what's coming out here.
Well, we're digging a basket maker 3 pit house here, Fro. It's a little hard to see from here. It's only half dug, as you can see. We've got a long curve, sort of a D-shaped curve here, which is the inside of a bench, which held up sidewall poles, which roofed this thing. Straight wall down on the east side, which should be the front of it. It doesn't show yet, but we should have a little passageway out there and a little rectangular antechamber, maybe 6-7 feet across on that side.
And what's the unfinished, the wall through here?
That's a balk that we're just leaving to check our stratigraphy. After all the rest of it's dug out, we can see a profile of that and see how the thing was filled, and then that'll come out eventually. It's not part of the house at all.
How about going down in and taking a closer look at it? How deep were these things originally?
About 3 or 4 feet, for all they should have been. Our original ground level was right at this level right here. And this is the level of a bench, this nicely plastered outfit. We still got about 2 feet to go to the floor, just about on the floor right here. This is Marcia Truell, Fro Rainey.
Hi, Marcia.
She
Nice
runs
to see
this
you. How are
outfit.
you?
Good to see you.
What are you finding?
Well, I'll show you. We're in trash here, and we find quite a few potsherds and a lot of this bone. Rabbit, rodent, turkey.
Marvelous preservation, isn't it?
Yeah,
Look at the little light bird bones, all beautifully preserved.
yeah.
Oh, my, that's a nice one.
Yeah,
Isn't that nice?
it's a nice little blade.
Fro, the reason there's so much garbage in here is that the place was used as a trash mound from another house after this one was abandoned. We have another house over there which was also filled with trash, and that's a lot easier to see because Marcia's finished cleaning that out, and you can see the features in that a little better. You want to come over and look at it?
Fine. Let's have a look.
Both of these were filled with basket maker trash. There has to be another basket maker house here that was the source of the garbage that filled both of these houses, and we're still prospecting around the edges of these. Fro, this house was built a little bit later than the one that Marcia's digging, but was the first one dug. Right here you're on the original ground level from which this pit was excavated by the builders. In the center you can see a little round fire pit, which was the hearth and the cooking place and the warming fire for the people living in this cold hole. Over here, just opposite it to the east, is a tunnel, which was a ventilator tunnel. When a fire creates an updraft, it will pull cold air through that ventilator system, thus making a circulation, clearing the house of smoke. Usually a little deflector was built right there between them. That's been removed. This house was raised when all the posts were removed. Over here in the four corners, we have 4 holes, which at one time held vertical posts, which held up the roof. We have a little model over here, Fro, which we show to visitors. It's hard for them to relate that hole in the ground to a covered structure, and this helps explain it a little bit. Here you see the 4 vertical posts, which held up a roof structure, and little post holes along the sides made a sloping wall, which then joined the plate that went around all 4 sides. And a ladder then went through a hatchway, which was also the smoke hole.
Al, I know that these pit houses have been dug all over this country. Why are you digging some more here?
Well, most of what we know about this period in Chaco is from inference from a great deal of work that's been done in the Mesa Verde area, and we're digging here to see how closely these relate to the Basket Maker 3 and early Pueblo 1 houses which have been excavated up in that country.
100 miles north of Chaco Canyon, in the better-watered uplands of southern Colorado, is Mesa Verde, the Green Table Mountains, so named by Spanish explorers in the 16th century. Up here on the mesa top, there's 20% higher rainfall compared with the desert lands that lie beneath it to the south. That 20% increase often meant to the ancient Anasazi farmers the difference between a sufficient crop or a hungry winter. Today, Mesa Verde is a national park and contains a large number of Anasazi buildings. They cover both the mesa top and the great natural caves eroded into the canyon walls. Dave Bredenitz, an archaeologist from the University of Colorado at Boulder, took Fro Rainey down into one of these great caves, Step House Cave on Wetherill Mesa. The site was not yet ready for visitors.
Who made these nice regular stone steps?
These were made by the people who lived here originally, and it's one of the reasons it's called Step House. It's a very convenient way of getting into the ruin. You can see they used the natural rock and made a series of steps out of it here. It makes the access to this ruin very easy.
And what about these great big rock shelters? How were they formed, do you think?
Well, you can see the break up above where there's a little moisture, and over hundreds of thousands of years, they have eroded out. These are not carved by the people, but are natural caves that the people lived in long after they were formed. This is an excavated pit house. It's been stabilized by the Park Service. Obviously, it doesn't have its roof on it, but you can see the fire pit and the areas for living in the bottom of it. And if we go on over here, you can see another one with some burned timbers in it. Right here, Fro, we have a storage pit, which indicates that the people could have their excess crops and they could save them for a while. Over here, you can see that this is a house that's been reconstructed as a replica of the actual way the roof that was put on.
Let's go down inside.
All right, follow me.
Boy, it's sure a lot cooler in here.
Well, I think these houses were built to be cool in the summer and warm in the winter.
Does that mean they lived here the year round?
I think that they did, and remember the storage pit we saw outside? I think that meant that they could store their surplus foods and didn't have to move during the year.
Does that make them farmers?
I'd prefer to call them gardeners.
By 750 A.D., the basket makers had gone through a slow cultural change. This diorama in the museum at Mesa Verde illustrates the Anasazi's next stage of development. As the population grew, they started to build wholly above ground. Rooms were joined together, making short blocks. Other structures retained the earlier pit house idea and formed the kiva, an underground room where the men got together to perform religious ceremonies. With the development of these above-ground room blocks, the evolution of the kiva, and the improvement of agriculture, archaeologists cease talking about basket makers and refer to these people as entering the Pueblo periods. Pueblo is Spanish for village, and as you will see, Anasazi Pueblos get bigger and more complex as time goes on.
I'd like to take you up into a later part of the ruin, Fro. These people lived here much later. They were still Stone Age people, and this is a good example of one of their work areas. I brought along an axe, and you can see this stone axe, evidence where they actually made their tools, sharpen their axes.
It's remarkable to think you could cut down an 8-inch tree with a thing like that. Have you ever tried it yourself?
Yes, I've tried it, and it looks very much like a beaver cut. The people had to do this in order to put roofs on their houses, and let's go up and see some of the rooms that they lived in. Here's an example for all of the rooms that the people lived in. The walls were once higher. They've fallen, and they had roofs on them, of course.
Dave, among all these jumble of rooms here, what represents one family?
Well, this is a good example. This would probably represent the needs of one family. This room is probably a living room, and then they had a work area out in front.
Don't I see some rock carvings on one of these fallen stones?
You find this rock art quite frequently. It meant something to the people who did them. We don't really know what they were. They did not have a written language as we have, so that this is not an alphabet of any kind. Perhaps it's graffiti, perhaps some of it is important. This pattern of families living in a little unit is repeated all over the ruin. And then, of course, when we get the whole community here, we get these community structures, such as this kiva right here. This no longer has a roof, but it was roofed over at one time, and it was level here. You could enter through the roof just like you did in the pit houses earlier, and this was mainly a place for the men to gather for work and for ceremonies. And while this was all roofed over, meantime, the women back here on this work area could be back here grinding the corn. I'll show you how they did it. I brought a grinding tool along with me. You can see here you place the corn on the stone and grind. Do that for several hours a day. It builds up tremendous muscles in your arm here, and we find in the skeletal material of the Pueblo women that the muscle attachments are much bigger than the men because they did so much of this activity.
Any idea how long it would take to grind a quart of corn?
Well, you can grind enough for a family in a couple hours a day.
Boy, that sounds like an awful dull job. What else did they have to do to amuse themselves, the women?
Well, the women probably the ones that made this beautiful pottery. Here are a couple of examples of the kind of pottery that these Pueblo ladies were making when they lived here in Step House.
Beautifully fired, very hard. They're food bowls, I take it.
Those were food bowls, and the cooking bowls were not painted.
What attracted the people to these great caves?
There was a natural protection, and people from the basket maker that we saw down below until the late people lived in here because of that protection, built their houses, and it was a continuous occupation. The last building date that we have in the cliffs is 1276 AD.
How accurate are those dates?
They're very accurate because they're based on tree ring dating.
Dendrochronology.
Yes.
Dendrochronology is just an academic name for dating timber by observing closely the pattern of growth rings in pieces of wood built into ancient structures. Each ring represents 1 year's growth. A thick ring means a good growing year, and a thin ring, a lean one. Trees growing in the same area will develop similar sequences of thick and thin rings. If you cut down a 100-year-old tree, you will find recorded in its rings a pattern, from its bark to its center, which reflects the changing climatic pattern going back 100 years. Now, supposing you found another tree felled, say, 75 years before the first tree. You could match the last 25 years of this tree with the first 25 of the modern tree. In the same way, still earlier trees can extend the pattern back and back into prehistory. In fact, with tree ring dating, we now have a master chart for the Southwest, which takes us back to before the time of Christ. Therefore, to date a wood sample from an archaeological site, you match the sample's growth ring pattern to the master chart, and so find out exactly when that piece of wood was alive and when it was cut down to form part of the building in which it was found.
Dave, what was the population of Step House?
Well, one rule of thumb is that there are 2 definite kivas here, and it takes 20 to 25 population to support it, so say 40 to 50 people for a Step House.
And how does that compare with the population of other pueblos in the Mesa Verde area?
Well, this is a medium-sized pueblo. There are some that are much smaller, and of course Cliff Palace is much larger. It has 220 rooms and 23 kivas.
This is Cliff Palace, which is the largest cliff dwelling known anywhere in the American Southwest, and probably the first white men ever to see it were Richard Wetherell and his brother-in-law Charlie Mason, and on a December day in 1888.
Cliff Palace, one of the showpieces of Mesa Verde National Park. Each year, more than 250,000 visitors climb down the steep approach stairs. They are looked after by park rangers who tell them about the site and answer their questions.
Across the way there on 3 short ladders and a short flight of stone steps into the crevice. Watch your step, if you would please, down in here. Don't want anybody to fall off. Continue on down this way. In fact, the original hand and toehold trail was very close to where we're going down now. They came, where we turned to come down to the left, this way. Nobody knows exactly why these people chose to move off of the mesa top around 1200, where they had lived for some 600 years, and down into these naturally formed overhangs. Most of what you're seeing down here is the original structure. Now, this has all been excavated. It was dug in by vandals and treasure hunters back in the 1890s and after. The early vandals really weren't sure who lived here, and they thought probably that there might be some kind of a rich people. And they found really nothing along that line, but they did find lots of nice black on white pottery. This kiva had a flat, level roof on it, and this roof was built of a framework of timbers which were laid around these pilasters or pillars that you can see all along the walls here. The small hole there in the floor is what's called a sipapu, and this was a symbolic opening down into the spirit world, from which the Pueblo Indians believe they came, and to which they believe they go after death. Right up here, as you start up into the crevice, is where you'll see the remains of the original trail. As you pass underneath that wooden log, begin looking on your right, and as I said, you'll notice a bunch of small notches which gradually wind their way up the cliff. And so if you'd been here 700 years ago, that was one of the ways you would have gotten in and out of Cliff Palace whenever you had to go up or down.
I'm glad I waited till today.
The most remarkable thing about Cliff Palace is its size. How did the original inhabitants of this great site raise enough food to store for the cold Colorado winters? From the evidence, it appears that these ancient farmers favored the mesa tops, which were clear of trees in those days. But it's difficult to imagine these rough mesa tops and canyons capable of producing a good corn crop. To prove that corn can be grown where the Anasazi once lived, you need only look 100 miles southwest of Mesa Verde to another prehistoric Pueblo Indian homeland, Canyon de Chelly National Monument in Arizona. There, deep in a river canyon, modern Navajos are able to grow corn much in the same way as their Anasazi predecessors did 1,000 years ago. Canyon de Chelly must be one of the great natural wonders of North America. For the past 50 million years, streams have been cutting into the sandstone plateau to form a canyon, in places 1,000 feet deep from rim to floor. Wind, frost, and water have sculpted all manner of fantastic forms, and the process continues as each year more rock breaks away, tumbles to the floor, and dissolves into sand. Unless you're a Navajo and just happen to live in the canyon, the only way you can enter Canyon de Chelly is with a guided tour. It's quite an experience. One of the stopping points on the tour is Antelope House. This is a prehistoric Anasazi pueblo which is being excavated and preserved by the National Park Service's Archaeological Center in Tucson. The archaeologist in charge is Don Morris.
Why don't you come down and take a look at this stuff? This should be a fairly typical load.
If we can see it.
Yeah. Well,
Deer bones, huh?
Yeah, I think so. Corn.
Normal size corn, Don?
That's a little small. Some of it's bigger than that.
These are real.
Yeah,
That's a Verde type?
Basically, yes. Now there's a lot of juniper bark, twigs. This kind of stuff, a great quantity of vegetable material comes out of here. Here's a sandal, that's nice.
Ah, isn't that nice?
Now we've gotten
quite,
isn't it? Yeah, worn and discarded. That's typical of the way we get most of these.
What's this just broken? Parts of clay for the walls,
wall
huh?
plaster mostly. There's a lot of building rubble and stuff.
Look at the preservation of these sticks even.
Yeah, this is, the place
Willow
is
sticks.
perfectly dry and it's extremely well preserved. Why don't you come up and let's take a look at where this is coming from. Pretty interesting location. When we started here, the fill was up about here and came down clear across here, covering all of this
And
material.
this line right in here is the line above which it was exposed before you began excavating.
Yes, right. We couldn't see this any of these windows.
All
at
buried,
here.
I see.
It was up nearly to here, as a matter of fact.
Don, I take it this is all classic Pueblo.
Right.
1200 AD, something like Mesa Verde, huh?
Absolutely, yes. This kiva is a little bit earlier. I'm not really sure yet, but it seems to have dated slightly earlier, a developmental Pueblo, perhaps.
That's a typical fire pit, except I see the fire back is broken down.
This thing was clobbered by rockfall from the cliff above, and it just knocked out everything, knocked out part of the fireplace and these walls, and made a mess of the floor. It was somewhat like this very large boulder that came down much earlier.
Good God, no wonder it smashed it. I see you've been doing some stabilization or consolidation here from the window on up.
Right, this is all repair work to anchor this falling wall in place.
This is the old wall right here, and this is the new part.
That's correct. We're just about done with this and ready to open up to the public. Should be ready in
They
just a
should be
few
in this
weeks.
summer then.
Right.